Let's launch it.
When I had tasted rum and vodka and whiskey, I'm starting to understand why they tasted the way they tasted in the flavor profile. But then I got that Chartreuse. Like, this is a whole space I didn't know about. Redbreast 27 has won best whiskey in the world 3 times.
That's incredible.
The variation and percentages of barrels that are going into the final product are a little different. We have 2.2 million barrels that are at Middleton Distillery, which equates to like 750 million bottles of booze. Are going to unlock the sugars that haven't been unlocked here.
Gotcha.
And this is going to help convert the unmalted part of it. And the final product is going to be the spicy, biscuity, rich mouthfeel.
Post or pre-workout.
It's a good post-workout. Redbreast 27 is what we're known for.
Yes.
What's really neat about this is when you tilt it and come back, it entirely coats. It is a space where, like, you've heard of the crack, right? Well, yeah, the crack. What's the conversation? So Jameson also led me to my wife and my career. So thank you, Jameson. My favorite thing to give someone when they say it's his 21st birthday, give him a shot. Yeah, that's a good way to welcome somebody to adulthood.
Irish whiskey almost disappeared, nearly vanishing under trade wars, prohibition, and bootlegging. But this episode isn't just about whiskey. It's about what the Irish built around it, especially like cities like Chicago, where bars and pubs became places for connection and community. Joe Nicol helps carry that story forward as a national brand ambassador for 2 of Irish whiskey's most iconic names, Jameson and Redbreast. He sits at the intersection of heritage, culture, and modern hospitality. Joe's story starts in hospitality, from washing dishes to discovering the power of spirits and storytelling. And the bar is a place that brings people together. That journey makes him the perfect guide for a conversation about Irish whiskey's past, present, and cultural impact. Joe, welcome to All in Good Taste.
Thank you for having me, Aidan. Pleasure.
Yeah, I'm so excited to get into this with you. I feel like the best place to kind of start here is take me back to your childhood, your upbringing. What kind of environment did you grow up in?
Yeah. Kind of a fun story, a lot of moving around. I was a military kid.
Okay.
So I got to learn multiple schools and multiple cities fairly quickly.
Absolutely. Was this like global
or national?
Or national. Okay.
Yeah, I started in California, but for most of my life, I was pretty much raised in North Florida in a little place called Jacksonville.
And tell me a little bit about your first, step into hospitality. Did this find you early? Did it find you later in life? What was your first job? Where did you start?
Yeah, I would say the first time I saw it, my grandfather owned a diner.
Okay. What was the name of the diner?
It's called Dip and Sip Donut Shop.
Dip and Sip Donut Shop. I love it.
It's classic for any viewers in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. They would know.
Is it still
about
around?
this place. It was iconic. It's not there anymore.
Okay.
But it was iconic in its day, and it was donuts and coffee. And I got to watch my grandfather be the first one in the door, the last one out. And having a single mom growing up, I often spent time there after school until she got off of work. So I got to see like the ins and outs of a diner and this F&B life fairly young.
Yeah. What were your first impressions when you started doing this at a young age, right? Did you think that this was going to end up being your career path? Did you have any idea? Where did you want to do? What did you want to have?
Is it cliche to say that I wanted to be an archaeologist? Because I feel like every guy, at least
to be an archaeologist. Wow, that's actually pretty cool though.
As a millennial, Indiana Jones and the Goonies and all these things we got to see growing up, I was fascinated by history, which kind of lends itself to why I found myself loving the history of whiskey. But I always wanted to dig in dirt, find dinosaur bones and such. But that's not the route I ended up taking. Of course, I found myself in the food and beverage industry, and I got to have all these kind of cool jobs along the way, from washing dishes all the way up to being the voice of a wonderful brand.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, starting and washing dishes. Yeah. What did that experience, teach you? What did that bring into your lifeblood of, joining the hospitality space?
It taught me humility for sure, because I was teaching at first. After school, I was teaching K through 8th grade.
Okay.
Teaching music for a few years at this little private school called the Little Red Schoolhouse.
Okay.
And they cut the funding for electives. And I found myself scrambling for a job. And my sister was a bartender at this pretty nice restaurant at the beach, and she got me in. She was like, "You're going to have to start at the bottom."
Yeah.
And I was like,
"You're going to have to grind."
I went to school, but I was doing all these things. Like, really, I got to do that? And so it taught me humility and patience. But within 3 years, I was the GM of that restaurant.
I mean, that's an incredible movement. So 3 years from running the dish pit to becoming a general manager is pretty impressive.
I think it was one of those things where maybe the owner wanted to see me move my way through the roles before he threw the management rule with this guy. But Maybe he was testing me.
Yeah.
So put him in the dish bit.
Yeah. see if he can, he can make it out. And I mean, so much respect for the dish pit. I mean,
Oh my God. Yeah.
that is arguably the hardest job in any kitchen.
I agree that the dishwasher is the backbone to the kitchen in that way that the bar back doesn't get enough love.
Yeah,
But quality bar back keeps the engine of the bar.
God bless barbacks.
Seriously, both of them same. We don't get enough credit.
Yeah. Speaking about bars and, things like that, do you remember the first time that a cocktail or something that you tasted, really stuck with you or jumped out at you?
Moving through those positions in the kitchen and finding my way to the front of the house,
Yeah.
I started to have to kind of understand wine and understand the spirits list and the cocktails that we were making at the time. This is the early 2000s, so frozen machines, the inception of Red Bull and shots, shot watcher. But there was some class back in the day too. And I would say the first thing that made me go, "What is this?" was Chartreuse. It's got to be. I have Chartreuse tattooed on my right kneecap for the logo. Because it is special to me. I was introduced to it by a good friend of mine, Rick Solchik, who's actually from Chicago. And up until that point, I had tasted rum and vodka and whiskey, and I'm starting to understand why they tasted the way they tasted in the flavor profile. But then I got that Chartreuse, and I was like, wait, what? You can make this too?
Oh, yeah.
This is a whole different element. And then that took me down the road of the Fernets and the Amaros, and I was like, this is a whole space I didn't know about.
For our listeners who might not know what Chartreuse is, can you talk about that briefly? I personally love ripping shots of green Chartreuse. That is like my go-to if I'm taking people who have not been in the industry out to a bar. I'm like, everybody, we're going to have a little delicious green spirit, and we're going to put it back. But for everybody who's listening, what is Chartreuse?
Yeah. Well, for one, it's my favorite thing to give someone when they say, it's his 21st birthday, give him a shot. Yeah, that's a good way to welcome somebody to adulthood.
Yes, that's a good way.
But what it is it was built on the backs of like Chartreusian monks. And when you go back, and we can get nerdy about history, here's Indiana Jones talking.
There you go.
We have the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of monasticism, and we get all these monasteries, and these are the places where they're discovering distillation. And Chartreuse is one of the oldest spirits, so this is getting discovered in the Alps. At the same time, we're discovering Benedictine and cognac and brandies and stuff in the 15th, 14th century. And so they discover that you can add all these botanicals to this spirit and get this potent, herbal, delicious nectar of the gods.
Yeah.
And it's been around for a really long time. I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, fact check me after this, is one of the top 5 oldest spirits that have been.
I don't know off the top of my head, so we'll definitely check into that's
Don't fact check me, it's true.
It's true, yeah. Just no fact check. Well, cool. I know obviously you work in spirits now. You became a general manager. I know you also spent some time in the bar space and in the cocktail competition space. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I moved around a bit, like a lot of us do in our 20s, from job to job as we're discovering where we want to fall.
Sure.
And I worked at that restaurant for a while, and then I found myself at another whiskey bar for a couple of years, and then I kind of tried to, as I was learning more about spirits, I kept trying to jump into that a little bit more elevated space to learn a little bit more. So I would feel like I've learned enough, like where can I go next? And that space where I feel like I really learned the most was when I found myself at the Ice Plant in St. Augustine, Florida.
Okay.
Which is still an iconic bar, an amazing space, but at the time, it truly had some amazing bartenders that went on to do world-class things, to open their own spaces, to find themselves in pretty serious roles. And I got to be a part of that program in its heyday. And some of the mentors that I had in that space is where I really came into taking it more serious and like taking the certs and really trying to fine-tune my palate and understand why these things taste the way they taste in the bottle. How do I bring that out into the glass, into the cocktail for the guests? How do I tell the story of that spirit? But all that really came to fruition, I feel like, at Iceman. I became more serious about it.
Is there any cocktails for yourself that you remember making at Ice Plant that like you were like, wow, I'm really proud of this? Like the first one, like, can you give us specs? Do you think of like anything that just jumps to, top of mind? If not, that's okay too. I know I just throwing this one at you, but
yeah, no, there was a few, a lot of the competitions that I was fortunate to go on.
Yeah.
And when I developed there at that bar with the help of some of the people, tasting your drink and giving you some feedback. But for there, I would say the most proud is when my cocktail finally made the menu. Because they do this really serious run where when you're presenting a cocktail that's going to be on the next menu, it has to make it down the bar across all the palates of the bartenders and the managers.
Yeah.
And so it'll literally be placed in front of the first person, and they'll say, I love it. Second person, I like it too. Third person, I think it needs this. And then you start over. And it's this really cool thing that it has to make it all the way to the owner, and she has to love it. The first time my cocktail made the menu, was a mezcal amontillado tiki cocktail.
Okay. And you love a tiki cocktail.
It was so good. And if I remember correctly, it was tropical notes. It had sherry, it had mezcal, it had pineapple, it had some other citrus notes to it. And I think probably 2 or 3 other things. I remember them being a little upset with me that I made the menu because it was like 8 touches.
Yeah.
So every time I ordered it, they're like,
especially for
"Try
sweet, I got to touch this.
Yeah.
Yeah. 8-step cocktails. Absolutely.
But I was very proud of finally making the ice plain menu. It was a really cool moment.
So would you say right around this point this is where it's, stopped feeling like a job and started to feel more like a passion?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they kind of ask you that in this industry, but for those of you that are here for the lifers,
Yeah.
at what point did it shift? And I would say it stopped being about clocking in, stopped being about the paycheck, and more about give me more. Yeah, I want another sir. I want to, what else can I learn? And I just became like really hungry for it. When you win that first competition, something changes. And
Can I ask which competitions you were?
yeah, the first time I ever won actually was Jameson.
Okay. Yeah. Full circle, right?
Oh, it really is full circle. I washed dishes at a restaurant. I ended up working at that restaurant when it reopened and got redeveloped by someone else as a high-end restaurant. And at that restaurant as an employee there, I won the Jameson competition. Double full circle. I full circled back as a second employee, and then I full circled back as Jameson. But I got to win the Jameson, and there was something about that community that I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
I love food. I love cocktails. I love going to bars and restaurants, but that I didn't tap into that cocktail culture yet of the people who were doing it at that level. And so I met so many people that said that to this day I'm still friends with, and I still love to come watch their stories unfold doing competitions.
Yeah. And you started to talk about Jameson, started to talk about Irish. Kind of want to jump into, talking about Irish whiskey and what makes it one of the most historic spirits in the world, right?
Yeah.
How far does the story of Irish whiskey actually go back?
It goes back pretty far. One of the stigmas or one of the misconceptions of Irish whiskey is that it's a shot culture.
Yeah.
Or that it's a subcategory of the overarching category of whiskey. But if we actually were to be picky about it and to be technical, I would say Irish whiskey is the category.
Yeah.
And everything else came from
From it.
Yeah, when we talk about distillation and we go back in time again, we're going to go back to 1405. And up until this point, there wasn't any grain distillate and there wasn't any recreational consumption. So the Irish, the Benedictine monks, who talk about Chartreuse monks, these are Benedictine monks in Central Ireland, they were the first to figure out a way to make it potable, recreational, and they also were the first to do grain. So from that point, those Benedictine monks would go back out into Europe and shout from the rooftops, we had this new way of making spirit, and you would get Jenever, which would become gin, you would get schnapps, you would get the vodka, the aquavit. They would emigrate to the States. There'd be a plethora of wheat and corn and rye in Canada and the US, and we get all these variations of whiskeys. But all these grain distillates go back to the Benedictine monks figuring out that, hey, we can make this. We don't have to be beholden to grapes. We can't grow them here, so let's figure out something else that we can nail. And they're already drinking beers and meads and stuff, so this barley also distills pretty well.
It's a pretty nice spirit.
Yeah, and then that's the birth of like poutine, aquavit, but that heard that term, the water of life, which
Yes, indeed.
yeah, ishkaba is what you would say in Gaelic.
At one point, Irish whiskey dominated the global market. When we say it dominated the global market, I mean, how big was that?
Quite literally second to rum.
Okay.
Rum was massive because you got rum in the Caribbean and during the East India Trade Company, and then all the shipping and stuff going on, a lot of rum was being consumed. But second to rum was pot still Irish whiskey. I would say, as far as our records go that we can see and look back on when we're looking at export records, about a quarter of global consumption was pot still whiskey.
That's impressive.
So like imagine walking into your bar, walking into your liquor store, a quarter of the jewelry all is like that's that style of whiskey. So a quarter of the world is consuming pot still Irish whiskey. And it was really like a, not elite, but a socialite kind of consumption. So, presidents and leaders and, these high society type were really drinking pot still whiskey.
So, I mean, what happened? It went from this, dominance to almost like completely disappearing. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and, what happened to Irish?
Yeah, it was very unfortunate circumstance, it's geopolitical, really, for the whole world at the time. But in its heyday, a couple of hundred distilleries, not all legal, some illicit, hiding out on the coast. But there were a lot of distilleries, and a quarter of the world is consuming it. And this is throughout the entire 1800s up until the early 1900s, and then by 1966, there's only 3 distilleries left, and less than 1% of people are drinking it. And if, for those of us that know our history, what happened between the early 1900s and 1966, a lot.
Yes, a lot.
Prohibition was the biggest one.
Yeah.
They're the number one consumer of Irish whiskey.
Have a couple wars in there too.
Couple wars in there, World War One, World War
small
II,
wars, you know.
Couple small wars, and when we get wars, we get grain shortages, we get fuel shortages, we get exportation being cut out because there's things happening out there in the ocean.
Yeah.
But also, what was really big was the War of Independence. So when they, yay freedom, but when you separate yourself from the crown, you also kind of get popped on the wrist. So it was bad enough we already lost the U.S., but now we lose all the British Commonwealth. And what we couldn't do then is that means we lost Canada. So even though Prohibition was happening in the States, a lot of people were smuggling booze through Canada back into the States and still staying alive. We couldn't even smuggle.
Yeah.
Because Canada was cut off.
Yeah.
And that leads me to what else affected us was smugglers, because pot still and bootleggers. Yeah, pot still whiskey was so popular that there was a demand for it, even though they couldn't get it.
Even though they couldn't get it.
So people were slapping labels on it, and before we know it, 15 years of Prohibition, people have a new idea of what Irish whiskey tastes like. But it doesn't taste like that. It's what the bootleggers have created. So with war and Prohibition and bootleggers, it really was a perfect recipe for bringing Irish whiskey to its knees.
So, I mean, it sounds like besides just obviously losing like market share, Irish whiskey lost a lot of its reputation.
It did.
How is, Irish tried to push its way back into the market? Like what sort of things, obviously, you have these great brands that are still popular and are still here today. So how do they begin to start to reclaim some of that market?
Yeah. Well, to keep it on brand, one of the mottos for John Jameson is Cinemetu, which is Latin for without fear.
Okay.
And you kind of take things on and you take it as you get it and you try to evolve and get through those times. And what they did was the last 3 remaining distilleries decided to just join forces. We can't cannibalize each other in Ireland. We got to figure this out and help Ireland as a whole. And so those 3 come together, and it's Jameson, its Powers, and its Cork Distillery Company. And they rebrand, put everything down in Cork at a bigger distillery, and they say Jameson is going to be the face of this new trio, this new idea. And they changed the recipe of Jameson because the trends have changed in the States now. People are back on the whiskey train. And so Jameson goes from being a single pot still to being a blend. And we started adding corn into the mix and to kind of stay with the times. And it only took a couple of decades, and before we knew it, Jameson was back as the leader.
Yeah.
And a lot of those other distilleries that you were mentioning that unfortunately closed, some of them were brought back to life by the likes of us or the others at their
or even ancestors, I'm assuming too, right? Families that close down comes back later down the line.
That is happening a lot now. In the resurgence of, there's about 40 distilleries now, and some of those are people reclaiming old land, old distilleries, or trying to bring those brands back to life.
For sure. And I know you did mention very briefly like corn being added to things. So like, where do you think Irish sits? Or what is the desire piece behind Irish? Because obviously, like, you're competing with the American market, like bourbon. You're competing with Scotland, with Scottish, with Japanese whiskey. So like, is it the accessibility? Is it the flavor profile? What makes it stand apart from like other competitors out there?
No, that's a good question, because it does seem like every day there's a new whiskey on the market.
There really is.
Yeah. And I would say we're just at the beginning of that. And I don't think it's a gimmick. I think there really is plenty of room for more and more whiskey to continue to come out. So it's no slight to all these new guys that are showing up and playing the game of whiskey. But what sets us apart, really, there's the 3 things that I like to talk about when it comes to Irish whiskey. And what sets us apart, some of that is right here on this table.
Yeah, let's jump in. And what's up here
is unmalted barley. Unmalted barley, this is malted barley, and this is unmalted barley. Unmalted barley isn't used frequently in the whiskey world. Almost not at all. It's unique to us. Okay. And what unmalted barley is going to do is lend this texture, this spice level to the spirit. And the second thing that's different, that separates us apart, is going to be our rules about maturation. Okay. When it comes to Irish whiskey, it's got to be 80 proof. It's got to be made and bottled in Ireland. And the third thing is that it has to be matured for 3 years. Yeah, for us, it's in wood. Very vague rule. So whoever had the foresight to do that is brilliant, because it allows us to play in whatever kind of space we want.
Definitely do a bunch of different things. Other ones have different rules that you can't.
You can't. So in American bourbon, after Prohibition, they made a new rule. It had to be virgin American oak. And then even beyond, right? It has to hit the different rules and laws on that on American bourbons. Yeah, if you call it a ball and behind, for sure, it has rules to it. And then Scotch is oak species. So for us, being able to play with, sure, we can play with oak, and we do. We will play with ex-bourbon quite a bit. Like a lot of our DNA is ex-bourbon and ex-sherry, but it allows us to play in those tertiary spaces or to age things in something like port, which you will get into later on. I'm sure you're thirsty, but we'll taste that in a little bit.
Always open for a dram, you know. And you've mentioned a few times too, because now we're talking about, you know, like what makes Irish dead. Can you tell us, I mean, a little bit like what is a pot still? What, like the physical like distillation method, like what does that look like?
Yeah, it looks like a big kettle. And there's two kinds of ways of making whiskey. We do both styles. There's column still, which is continuous still. You can also call it the coffee still. It's had a bunch of names over the centuries.
Yeah.
And that is where you are loading it from the top, and it's resisting like to steam. And the steam is continuously distilling this and catching the vapors. And it's going to be a higher octane spirit. It's going to be a lighter spirit. And it's going to be, you can literally do 24/7. Versus pot still is more done in batches. You're going to load it from the bottom. It's a slower game, and it's a lower ABV at the end. But you're also going to get a different body to it, more of this richness to it. You can also play around a little bit more with that finished product at the end. If you want to leave in some of the fusel oils like we do in Redbreast, you're going to have this awesome mouthfeel to it towards the end. But what also is cool about copper is how it interacts with esters. And esters are the flavor components of the spirit.
Okay.
And there's all kinds of ester. There's acids and there's sulfuric compounds and all these other things that you want and that you don't want. And copper will strip away sulfuric compounds. So as it's distilling and as we're separating the alcohol from the water and refining that alcohol and getting a higher proof, we're also keeping flavors that we want and getting rid of flavors that we don't want. And that's going to happen throughout the triple pot still distillation.
Super cool. And I know we have this beautiful bottle of Redbreast in front of us. Can you talk to us a little bit about Redbreast, you know, in general? I know we also have some wood in front of us too, so I do want to touch on that too. But like, I want to hear the pitch. I want to hear the spiel. You know, like, let's talk about this.
Let's do it. Let's talk about Redbreast, but let's start with the grain again, because there is a lot of process to this. So everything starts, you know, it's grain to glass. You probably hear that term a lot, or barley to bottle, as we say in Ireland. And then the DNA really is here. The precursor of flavor is going to start with your grain choice, whether you use barley, corn, wheat, however you want to start, maybe agave if you're making a mezcal.
Okay.
But for us, it starts here. And it's going to be about 60% of unmalted barley and about 40% of malted barley. And when you talk about unmalted barley, you're talking about a lot of starch. We haven't captured the sugars in there yet because they haven't been malted. When you malt something, you're going to almost trick it into brewing. You're going to introduce temperature in water, and it's going to start to turn into sugars. And as soon as it starts to sprout, it uses that sugar to kind of shoot up and become a plant. And that's its energy source. But we're going to stop it right there. And then you kiln it and you toast it, or if you will, and you're left with the sugary part of the barley.
Okay.
So actually, let's taste it together.
Okay.
Because when you have a little piece of unmalted barley,
Yeah.
there really isn't much flavor there. But I want you to bite into it, crack it, put it on your tongue, and press it to the roof of your mouth. You're going to start to salivate a little bit because your mouth is trying to process the enzymes that are in here because it's full of starch. Yeah, not a lot of flavor though. But what this is going to do is give us that creamy mouthfeel that you're starting to feel already.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In the finished product, we're going to get that lent to fermentation. I'll join you. It's delicious.
Yeah.
And very different is malted barley, because we have captured all these sugars that we want. I like to think of this as like a locked box, and these are keys.
Okay.
And
Right.
when you add these together in mashing and then in fermentation, the keys, the sugars, are going to unlock the sugars that haven't been unlocked here.
Gotcha.
And this is going to help convert the unmalted barley. And the final product is going to be the spicy, biscuity, rich mouthfeel
Yeah.
that then goes into distillation.
Okay.
But chew on this. It's like, reminds me of like Honey Nut Cheerios.
Wow. No, it actually does.
Like I could probably just
Yeah, I could just
snack
snack on that. Yeah. I mean, what's the nutritional value of snacking on some malted barley? But
Well, everything has protein in it now.
Hey,
So
there you
there's
go.
probably there's probably protein in it.
so it's a good post or pre-workout.
It's
you
a
know?
good post-workout. Redbreast 27. That's what we're known for.
Yes.
No. So we take these. They're going to undergo fermentation. As you feed sugar to yeast, as we know in the spirits world, and the yeast turns the sugar into carbon dioxide, heat, and of course ethanol, which is what we want. And within that ethanol is going to be all these fun flavors, but we need to distill those down, pun intended. So we're going to separate all the gunky stuff from the liquid, take that 10%-ish beer that we have made in fermentation, load it into the pot stills, and start to refine those flavors. And then after we have found the flavor that we want, after 3 distillations cycles, we then put it into barrels where it can mature and become whiskey one day on the shelf. And this is a little bit of an example of what that can look like. This is just distillate that's been sitting in sherry.
Gotcha.
You can see that beautiful amber color that's going to come from those wine elements and the tannins and stuff in that sherry barrel and the Spanish oak. And this is a little bit different. This is after sitting in a bourbon barrel. More of like a haze straw color. It's going to come from that barrel.
Yeah. Because I mean, like a lot of the obviously the flavor in whiskey, right? It's coming straight from the wood, right? Or
A lot of flavor.
Yeah.
That's an argument for the distiller and the maturation warehouse. They love to say whose flavor comes from
who's
where.
responsible?
Yeah. But I would say in all reality, I would say at least 3/4 of flavor is going to come from the ethanol interacting with the wood. And then that's also called esterification in the wood. And that's where we're going to get most of it. But you wouldn't get that flavor if the precursor flavor wasn't there to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, so there is something to say
There's something
about
to be said about
how
it,
you
right?
started. It definitely has a lot to say with how it finished. But the barrel is influencing a majority of the spirit in there. Yeah.
One of the things I always think is, really interesting too, is we talk about, how whiskey ages. And obviously we have a bottle here with quite a healthily aged spirit. After a couple of years, how much of that whiskey disappears in the barrel?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because for us, we have 2.2 million barrels
Yeah.
that are at Middleton Distillery, which equates to like 750 million bottles of booze. So when you have that,
It's a crazy number.
It's a crazy number.
It's a crazy number.
A lot of zeros.
Yeah.
So 2% a year on average. Our climate's fairly temperate. It doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold in County Corp. So about 2% evaporation a year versus Rhyme or Kentucky being a little bit more because of the climate. So when you do the math, essentially,
It's like we're looking at almost like 60% potentially of an empty barrel on this, right?
yes, when you crack open this quart barrel, it's about a third full.
Yeah.
Okay, 2% a year. But that equates to losing or sacrificing 30,000 bottles a year. When you do the math on how many barrels we have and how much evaporation affects us, we are basically donating 30,000 bottles to a pretty cool party.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool for the Angels and the Bishops, right? Yeah, just the wood share and to the Angels too. But that's it's really interesting stuff. Should we crack into this guy?
I think we should.
Let's do it, please.
This is Redbreast 27, and this is going to be batch 5. It comes in batches. They're up to batch 6 now.
Okay.
And all that means is that there are some nuances to each batch. They're all fairly similar. The variation in percentages of barrels that are going into the final product are a little different. But I'd be remiss to use a jigger. I'm just going to pour you.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I won't
fight you a little something here.
Thank you.
So
Much
Redbreast
appreciated.
27, we talked about ex-bourbon and ex-sherry, and that's super important in what we're doing in Irish whiskey. Up until the 60s, it was predominantly all sherry cask. It was single pot still all sherry. And then after Prohibition, there was this new law about virgin American oak. So all these barrels that these whiskey guys couldn't use anymore hit the market. So Scotch and Irish were like, we'll take a crack at those.
We'll take
And
a
before we and it worked really well. And when you go back to Max Crockett and Barry Crockett, our distillers, father and son, for a few decades there, they really fell in love with what bourbon barrels were doing to spirits. And it kind of became the new backbone. A lot of our stuff is about 50% ex-bourbon, at least.
That's really cool.
And with this, there's a tertiary barrel. I know it's a beautiful red color. That is a play on port because it is ruby port. And it spends all of its time in ex-bourbon, in ex-sherry, and in ex-port. And then the blend of that goes into the bottle is the secret. And it comes out to be this beautiful spirit. Redbreast 27 has won best whiskey in the world 3 times.
That's incredible.
Redbreast is the most awarded Irish whiskey. And also Middleton Distillery is the most awarded international distiller as of last year. We got a few golds last year that put us over whoever's in second. Yeah. But
I was just
not us anymore.
Ireland in August and drank my fair share of Middleton whiskey. Went to a couple of the different whiskey libraries, the one in Dublin, and then also in the north of Ireland, in Belfast.
Yeah.
And just drank way through so much Irish. But I mean, Redbreast is a list, and I'm super excited to jump into this. So for people who aren't used to like doing rare spirit tasting, sipping, drinking, how are we going to drink this? How are we going to get into this glass?
Yeah, we are
Going to do a little step by step if that works for you.
Yeah, we're going to eat with our eyes.
Yeah.
As you do. You always observe something first. And what I mean by that, we can swirl it around. We can turn it at a 45. And then we can set it back. And then you can watch how it coats. Sometimes you see the legs of, or the tears, the whiskey tears, if you will,
Yeah.
but come down in little drops.
Yeah.
But what's really neat about this is when you tilt it and come back, it entirely coats. It doesn't even hang down in drops. It hangs down. It's like as if you just poured it down the side of it.
Absolutely.
Which is a testament to its richness and to its oiliness. And we're going to get in there. I like to take 3 big.
Okay.
The first one's going to burn a little bit, wake you up. You get used to that smell.
Yeah.
You're going to do it again. Maybe purse your lips a little bit. Keep your lips open. Let your olfactory nerve fire all the way through.
Smells.
It really is gorgeous,
Yeah,
right?
that is
It's like
beautiful.
plummy and figgy and almost some citrus skin
Yeah.
in there too. And then you're going to take a little bit, and because we've had some coffee and we chewed on some barley,
Yes.
let's take a little sip and let's wash that around our mouth. Let's work it into our gums and let's fire up all those nerves.
Great.
We'll do a little sip. And while that is delicious,
Yeah.
now that we have kind of woken up our senses, we've coated our mouth a little bit, got rid of that coffee taste for the most part, we're going to take a second sip.
Okay.
And this sip, I want you to let it rest on your tongue and just let it kind of fall into your mouth. And let it sit there as long as you can. When it starts to burn a little bit, because it is a little bit higher proof, then swallow it.
Got it.
But let it sit there as long as you can and try to identify all those flavors that you're having.
Wow.
Pardon me. It is gorgeous.
That is some delicious juice.
Redbreast comes from a time when you could go get whiskey from the distillery.
Yeah.
Because a lot of distilleries that we know when it comes to the whiskey world were hid.
Yeah.
Think of like the Appalachian Mountains hiding moonshine distilleries that would go on to be bourbon. You think of the Glens hiding whiskey that would go on to be Glenlivet,
All the Glens.
all hiding in the Glens. Yeah. But when it comes to Irish whiskey, it was industrial. So it was front and center. We made a lot of it. We were loud. We were proud. But because we made so much, there was plenty to then go out to merchants. And so these were the Gilbey brothers they imported fine wine in London and Scotland and Ireland. They were very successful. After they had bottled, like you do back then, you would import a barrel, bottle it yourself, label it yourself, and sell it as your own in your shop. After they had these empty barrels of wine, they would send them down to John Jameson. And Jameson would fill them up with pot still distillate. And so they'd fill these sherry butts up with pot still distillate, and then they would go on to age in their cellars for quite some time, and then they would label and bottle that.
Yeah.
And that would go on to become Redbreast. And one of the brothers was an avid bird watcher. So
As the name.
the Redbreast name comes from the robin redbreast, which is the bird of Ireland.
Yeah.
And romantically, it's the only bird that hangs around all winter. So it doesn't migrate. So you can hear it singing and see it flying through the trees.
It's always there. So Redbreast
Always there.
Always there.
So Redbreast is always there. There's a module in it. So it's a really cute name, a romantic name that ties back to the brothers. But
Great. I'm going to grab one more sip.
Yeah, of course.
Because that is delicious.
it really is.
What is remind me the appropriate way to say cheers? Gaelic.
Slunch it.
Sláinte.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sláinte.
Slunch it. We'll be slunching quite a bit this week. Yeah.
Yes, we
We're in St. Patrick's season.
Yes, we are. Which, speaking of St. Patrick's season, I would love to jump into a little bit of the history of Chicago and Ireland, right? There is, Chicago is a very, very, very heavily Irish city. How did, Irish immigrants start to influence Chicago?
Yeah.
I mean, we still see today, we have one of the largest St. Patrick celebrations in the world here in Chicago, which goes down every year. But how did the immigrants start to really impact the city here?
Yeah, that's going to go all the way back. We're famously Irish, Polish, German immigrants came through here through Ellis Island once upon a time and settled here. And the Irish brought that same culture that you kind of see in almost equated to like New Orleans, where you have these parishes. Chicago was kind of propped up on neighborhoods.
Gotcha.
And each neighborhood had its church, each neighborhood had its pub, most likely owned by someone of Irish descent. And what I think is pretty cool about those neighborhoods, about that pub, is that pub would probably be the first place where that new immigrant would feel at home, would feel like a citizen. And nowadays we go to the pub and you can grab a burger, you can grab a beer. But truly what it was is you can probably go get your groceries, you can find a job, you could ask for work, you could get pointed in the right direction. It is more of this community space where you could feel like you were becoming a citizen.
Yeah.
And on the backs of that, we have built just an amazing community in Chicago.
Yeah.
We have our amazing neighborhoods where you can go and taste cuisine from almost everywhere around the world. And the Irish really have propped up Chicago in just an awesome way. And of course, we have the largest St. Patty's Day in the world.
Yeah.
Which I do think it is the largest in the world.
I didn't want to misquote and say it was. So I was like, I'm pretty sure it is. It was like 90% there, but I didn't want to say it and be incorrect. So
Yeah. And we still see that. You can still find like pubs that are like fifth, sixth, seventh generation owned in this city. And I think that's pretty special. There's some awesome pubs out of that.
So we've talked a lot about, the impact that an Irish pub has on culture here in Chicago, or honestly culture around the world. I mean, I love the quote of, you go anywhere in the world, you can find an Irish pub. Yeah. They are literally anywhere and everywhere. You know what you're going to get. You can go get a pint of Guinness. You can go get a big glass of Irish, and great hospitality. And I do want to briefly sing the praises there. When I was just in Ireland in August, I mean, I would argue to say I've probably not felt a more welcoming hospitality anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I think I can really hard agree with that.
Yeah.
As someone who already feels like a little bit of imposter syndrome, I might be like a tiny percentage Irish, but I do not have the accent. I do not claim the country, but yet I get to talk about them as the ambassador. But anytime I am over there, I do not feel the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
They're very welcoming. From the big cities of Dublin and Cork to the tiny towns of Galway and Dapol, like they're all just across the board so hospitable.
Yeah, my mom is 100% Irish. She came over when she was very, very young. So there's a little bit of a tie there, which we actually did our first Ireland trip this year, and we actually went together as a family, and she hasn't ever been since. So it was really cool to go kind of do that. And she's from Cork, Kim County Clare. So I love that. We keep saying Cork and that. So we did 2 weeks jumping around all of Ireland, but I mean, like the hospitality and the experiences were absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
From there, though, I mean, I feel like we talk a lot about, today in society that like we're missing the third place, right? You have your home, you have your work, and you have this. Would you say that Irish pubs were like the original third place?
Absolutely. We were talking just now about how it was bigger than just a bar, just a place to get a bite to eat, and to be the place you found work, or et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's definitely the third place. And even to this day now in 2026, everyone likes to find that home bar or that home pub, the space in between the home life and the work life where you can just be, or just talk, or just, talk with friends, be yourself. And that can even extend into the space.
Yeah.
Into the dive bar space too, right?
Yeah. When you walk into a pub, what makes it feel authentically Irish?
No, that's a good question. And I'm not Irish, so I don't want to misspeak.
Not to misspeak.
But I would say, for starters, no TVs.
No TVs.
No TVs. It is a space where, like, you've heard of the crack, right? What's the crack? What's
Absolutely.
the conversation?
Yes.
To me, it's the conversation. I'm not there to watch the football game.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't be surprised if they pull the TV out when Ireland's in the World Cup. But
Yeah.
to cheer them on. So that'll be an exception. But I do think it's the conversation. Maybe there's a little bit of light music in the background. Maybe it's live. An amazing beer on draft, great whiskey collection. And it's just this rustic space that feels lived in. You were just over there, so you know what I mean. You walk into these wood panel walls on these floors that are 200 years old, and just amazing cold pour Guinness.
Yeah.
I know that's Diageo. So
Hey, Guinness is absolutely delicious, and it does taste different in Ireland. It does. I mean, love open gate here. Obviously, we're blessed to have our own Guinness, brewery here in Chicago, but God, it tastes different in Ireland. With those sorts of things too, kind of want to talk about, modern hospitality and how the pub spaces and scene has like moved here, and kind of want to talk about like the drinking culture has been shifting. What have you been seeing there? What have you been experiencing that firsthand? Because I mean, obviously your business is representing some huge names in the booze spirit world.
that question changes depending on the country that you're in. But for us, it's trending differently, and I almost can't be mad at it because it does feel like Gen Z is seeking to be healthier than we were.
Yeah.
And
Which I mean is not a bad thing.
Which you can't get upset about. Like they are discovering other ways to have fun recreationally and then drinking a little bit less. And also we're having kids less.
Yeah.
So our parents had kids at a rate that was twice as fast as what our generation is having them at. So we're replenishing ourselves less too.
Yeah.
So there's less people to consume the spirits that we used to drink, and people are being a little bit more conscious, which I'm totally okay for. And there's spaces to still play in. Like we're seeing a really cool surgence of low ABV cocktails or even mocktails. Yeah, they're not getting really cool and creative.
Yeah.
And I think that's more power to you. You know, I'm not here to push whiskey onto anybody, but when they do find that time to drink some delicious whiskey, hopefully when they do, they reach for a bottle of some high-end Irish whiskey.
Yeah, and I know we've talked a little bit about Redbreast. I also want to, of course, mention Jameson there too. What do these brands do to, not necessarily be trendy, but stay timeless?
That's a good question. When it comes to Jameson, is right there, it's the heritage. Having been on the top for so long, they go back to 1780.
Yeah.
And they've been making whiskey and doing it well and been on or near the top the entire time. And those are two different spaces that they play in. We think of Jameson, you hear the shot culture, the Jameson ginger ale and lime is the signature. We call it the JGL. That's going to drink for a long time. Jameson really, in this resurgence that we're talking about post, wars and post 60s, was really the resurgence happened in the bars. And really we can find it in Brooklyn. It really kind of started popping off in the bar communities in Brooklyn, and they brought it back. So it's become like a bartender handshake, if you will. One of those go-to spirits for like-minded food and beverage individuals. But Jameson being a global brand, it can find its space in all these things. You see us in sports.
Yeah.
We're a big part of sports, the MLS, the NFL, NBA, what have you. And that's our place to play. Obviously, we're different price points, so it's going to play in a different way on a larger scale.
Yeah.
And then when you think of more prestigious, timeless, a little bit more classy spirits, we can dive into something like Redbreast or Spots or Middleton whiskeys that can find themselves in whiskey bars and Irish pubs and nice restaurants. They have a way of working together without competing against each other, even though we're in the same portfolio. They kind of cover two different spaces.
Yeah. I know off camera, you did also tell me, that like people tend to buy liquid once, but they can identify it forever. Can you unpack that idea a little bit?
Yeah, in the marketing world of trade advocacy, marketing is like a transaction, and storytelling is the invitation. And so you might have had the transaction of having a nice glass of whiskey, or buying a bottle, maybe enjoying it with your father or a loved one, but then the storytelling part, that what do you remember about that? Hopefully that this whiskey was so powerful that it takes you back to the moment that you had tried it. And so it's a little bit of both. You need the marketing and you need the storytelling to kind of play together.
Yeah. Talking about continuing with like the drinking culture and the pieces of that. I know off camera you shared with me. I mean, I know we obviously shared a bit of a dram, but you yourself are personally sober, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously mine is tasting and educational pieces. How do you manage that, like being in a bar space so frequently? I'm sure there has to be some additional pressures or like outside things there. How does that work for you? Is there other people in your space who also do the same thing? Because I mean, to me, it's an incredible skill to be able to be like, I know exactly what this is. I can taste through it. I can tell you everything about it, even though you're not actively partaking on like a frequent basis.
Yeah, I think it is still important to taste it, for me at least. Yeah, for me, just to preface that, I decided to quit because of health issues. I didn't decide to quit because I didn't have any issues with consumption or like that. It was more of a kidney thing.
Yeah.
And so I still do like to taste. It's nice to remind myself how things taste, and we get new bottles and new expressions all the time. And it's nice to be able to talk about those correctly. But there are a lot of people who are in the NA world right now.
Yeah.
Some heavy hitters that I really look up to or I admire in the industry that actually are sober.
Yeah.
And they'll still taste their cocktails when they're creating their menu for their award-winning restaurant. And they'll still taste their whiskey when they're talking about it. But there are a lot of really cool people in that space. And I guess you have to learn how to shift the way that you interact when you're out and about, right? You're no longer you're kind of the vessel of the in between the drinking and the brand. And you can still go out there and be that person without having the consumption. And it has been interesting to learn how to do all that, because I do enjoy a dram or a cocktail. But in the last 3 months or so, I've been learning how to kind of navigate that space.
Has that, helped you focus a little bit more on like hospitality or like those sorts of things and like those different touch points with, not necessarily being able to dive in like you used to? Or what has that, taught you? What other skills have you developed from this?
Oh man, I'm sure those who have taken breaks before can speak to the clarity.
Yeah.
That suddenly
Sure.
that suddenly shows up. I definitely have put myself first a little bit.
Yeah.
In my 40s now. For a long time, it was always about the job, about the cocktail, about the spirit. So being able to put yourself first is definitely important. Waking up and whether it's however you take care of your health, whether you're juicing fresh juice or you're going into to hit the gym, it's nice to put a couple of things first. I didn't do that as much before, and looking back now, you realize like how much or how easy it is to miss out on the gym or healthy breakfast when you're recovering from a night of
Oh, that is true.
Jameson.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. A hangover will definitely take you out of the next day. I can't argue with that. You also mentioned to me that, like the liquid itself, right? It's at the end of the day, it is the prop. It's the thing that you're talking about is selling, but at the end of the day, it's really about connection and the moment between people.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? How have you developed that skill over your years in the industry?
Yeah, of course. And I think that can also tie into to those who are taking a break from drinking or maybe aren't drinking at all. The whiskey is just the vessel for the moment. Like I think of the whiskey as the campfire that draws us all in to gather around and hang out with each other. It goes back to the crack or the conversation. So the spirit or the bar is just a vessel really to just get us all together. Whether you're enjoying a water or enjoying whiskey, you're still there in the community and you're still there.
Yeah, you're still at a station. Absolutely. So when people walk into a bar today, what do you think they're looking for?
And hospitality.
Yeah.
Right now more than ever, when after COVID, we had this new era of like glued to our phones, and a lot of us have become a little bit introverted. And it's just we forget just like a smile, nail across the bar, or a conversation just goes a long way. We don't have that interaction as much as we used to.
Yeah.
And we've almost kind of gotten away from it a little bit. So hospitality. I don't care if my burger came out wrong or my drink, maybe I didn't like it that much, but if I thought the hospitality was incredible, I will go back to that restaurant. Versus if the hospitality wasn't good and my burger or my drink was gone, it's hard to give that spot the second look. But when the hospitality is there, like that's all we really want, is to feel like we walked into our home.
Yeah. Earlier on, we talked about how the Irish pub, helping people gather. What do you hope the next generation keeps alive in the hospitality space?
Oh man, that is awesome. I'm actually seeing some really cool things coming from this next generation of bar owners and bartenders. It's becoming even more inclusive.
Yeah.
And I love that. I want to see it become as inclusive as we can get it. And I would love to see that trend across all the states. Each state looks at inclusivity a little bit differently, as we all know, but we tend to find inclusivity in our space. In the food and beverage community, it's always been about inclusiveness. So I'd love to see more people propped up in that space as we move forward. And just to keep that alive, keep that campfire burning, keep it burning, and keep the hospitality alive, and let's bring more people to the campfire.
That's great. Honestly, I think all of that was fantastic, and thank you for sharing so much of that with us. We're just going to switch to our last little segment here, which we like to lovingly refer to as our case menu. It's a set of 6 questions that we ask every single guest just to kind of get a quick last gauge on your experience in the hospitality space. So starting off the top, our amuse bouche. What's the smallest gesture of hospitality that's had the largest impact on you?
The smallest gesture to me, and being on one side of the bar and the other, is remembering their name.
Okay.
It's tiny.
Yeah, remember, I mean, it matters, right?
Yeah. Smiling, of course, you greet someone with a smile because that's the first interaction they have to seeing you is with the smile. But if they're back a second time and you remember their name, man, that's powerful.
Okay. Jumping to our appetizer, what dish, drink, or moment first made you fall in love with this industry?
Maybe that goes back to the first time I won a cocktail competition, or even just been in one. It doesn't have to be win, but just to be in and see that space exists and that there's these people doing really cool things on a different level, and made me fall in love and really grab onto it.
That's great.
And I haven't let go 6
years in. Hey, we're here, right? For an entree, what is the hardest part of the work that the guests never get to see?
The long game.
Yeah.
This industry will eat you up. We've seen a lot of people, a lot of our friends. It's a hard lifestyle to work with, to work around. It's a long time if you're a lifer. And there's a lot of ups and downs, and the dark side of running a bar or a restaurant, very slim margins.
Yeah.
A lot of pressures, a lot of alcohol abuse lives out there, and it's just they don't see the long game. They see your smiling face making a cocktail and giving it to them at the bar. They don't know what it's like to go home with with the paychecks and the shortcomings that can come in this industry.
Yeah.
They don't see the big wins, that really bring you up and make you proud of yourself. So all they see is that same person at the bar. But the long game.
Going to our palate cleanser, tell me about a time that spontaneity led to something incredible.
To get sentimental, I bet my wife,
Okay.
she would come into my bar and she brought her friend in one time for lunch. And the spontaneity of asking if she wanted to hang out with me, and go see a movie with this bartender.
Yeah.
It turned into 10 years and a marriage. Fun story about that too. After we went and saw a movie, we saw Star Wars. It was our first date. We went
What
to
is
go,
Star Wars?
the first of the newer trilogy in 2015.
Yes.
And afterwards, we go to a bar to get a drink because you didn't get to talk in the theater. So talk and hang out, let's go get a drink. And the bartender asks what we would like to drink, and we both cut each other off, and at the same time said Jameson splash of water.
Wow.
Yeah. Which
Full
also
circle
ties
again for the third
two known
time here.
circles.
It's too
But
many
it's a true
circles.
story. It's a true
too many
story.
circles.
And so Jameson also led me to my wife and my career. So thank you, Jameson.
That's great. And to our dessert now. What does good taste mean to you?
Etymology of taste is sapere in Latin. It's also the same word for wisdom. So to me, it's not about how elevated or elegant your palate is. It is the wisdom to just understand the space that you're in. Right. Cool. And thank you for the Latin language for making one word mean multiple things, because it just props up the answer. But I've always thought that was pretty cool, that they actually meant back then, like, in good wisdom. So it could really go,
That's really
it translates.
I'm gonna have to remember that one.
Yeah.
And then lastly, to our digestif, if you could leave our listeners with one important lesson from your journey, what would it be?
Authenticity. Lead with it. No, I learned the hard way. You have a little bit of a shell in your 20s and your 30s. You make mistakes, and you have to find humility. But honestly, what works the best is just to be through those, to live through those, and be transparent through those. And I think just be your authentic self and tell your story for what it is, and people will like you or love you for that story. And just do those. Be you unapologetically.
Fantastic. Joe, thank you so very much for your time today. This has been great, sharing a dram, talking about Irish whiskey, talking about Irish culture, and talking about your background. Joe, where can people find you? Like social media, can they find you? Is there anything? I just want to give you the opportunity if you want to plug yourself, anything like that. But
yeah, for sure. I am based in Chicago.
Okay.
I get to go out there and travel to all the fun big cities and see all of your faces around the country. But you can find me as Make Dram Sure on Instagram. Yes, it's a Take It Back Sunday song. Yes, I still listen to emo music at the gym. So you can find me there on social media, and I'm always there to answer any questions that you might have about Irish whiskey, or just shoot me a friendly DM or shoot me a follow to see what kind of going on in our space.
amazing. Thank you so very much for your time today, Joe. My name is Aidan Descourouez, and this has been All in Good Taste.